I think this is going to be the best sound you've created in the studio.
I think you're right. Yeah, alright.
That sounds awesome.
This is my Whisky Barrel Guitar Cab. It's probably one of the coolest things I've made on the channel, apart from turning the Strat into a Strandberg. That was seriously fun. First thing you're going to need is a whiskey barrel. Now, I got mine from a friend, but you can pick them up from eBay for about 80 or £100. So have a look on the internet and order one. That's going to be the most expensive part of this project. That's a lie, because you're going to need a speaker cone, and it's probably a good idea to go for a Celestion. I went for a Celestion Creamback, and that's probably 120, 150 quid. So all up, this should cost about, I'm going to say 300. I didn't keep track, but I'll put a tally at the end. The first thing you're going to want to do, there's metal rings around the edge of this, so you're going to make sure they're nice and tight. So get a hammer and a bolster. There is a special tool for this. I didn't use that. I used a club hammer and a bolster, and just hit them on. Make sure they're nice and tight around the barrel, because you don't want it spreading out. Next, you want to sort out the depth of the cab. So you're going to measure. I went 280mm, which is about 11 inches, and I just measured from the front edge backwards all the way around. The reason I went for 280mm, it's about the same as a Marshall cab, and I was like, well, Marshall probably know what they're doing. Then I used like a flexible ruler just to bend and draw the lines and go from there. You may have to remove one of the rings, which I had to do, so you can put that back on. So I made sure the front two, these two near the front of the cab, were on super tight. I had to remove the next one because I think it was where I needed to cut, or it was past where I needed to cut. So take one of the rings off. You might not need to, but I had to. Then you're going to want to saw along those lines that you've made. You can probably use a jigsaw. The problem with the jigsaw, it'll go square with what you're cutting on, so that cut's going to be at an angle. I used a handsaw, so that cut line is parallel with the front edge of the cab, which I think is a better way of doing it. Bear in mind, this is like inch thick oak that's been soaked in whiskey, so it's not going to be an easy job. To make your life easier, what I used is 1/2 inch screws, these black screws, so about 12mm. I'll put a link to everything I used in the description. And the whiskey barrel is made out of loads of different slats of wood. So sort of every other slat, I drilled a hole through the metal rings and put a black screw into it. And then on the next ring back, I put a screw through to the ones between those just to hold everything in place. So that's 2 of the rings. But there's a 3rd ring I wanted back on. So I started at one end of that. Actually, before I did that, I put rested the ring on the barrel, and there's 2 sort of bolts holding that ring together. So I got an angle grinder out and I cut through those bolts because it was too loose. So you might have to do that. So use an angle grinder, remove the 2 bolts, then you've just got a long flat bit of metal. Start at one end, use those little black screws to keep it sort of taut all the way around. Screw it in every other thing, bring it all the way around, and then you can see where you need to put 2 new bolts. So drill a couple of holes through for that. I used 30mm M6 bolts and some washers. I'll put a link to all of this in the description. Looks really good, and that sort of holds that ring nice and taut. And then between pretty much every one of the black screws, or sort of most of the way around on every ring, I drilled a load more holes, and with those M6 bolts, I put them, you can see them here, so I put them just to make sure that those rings stay in place, because wood's going to expand and contract, and those little screws, they'll probably snap over time, whereas those bolts are not going to. Also, I put a link to the M10 spanner because I couldn't find mine, typical. The inside of this, it was absolutely filthy. It looks like they burn it or something. I don't know if they do it on every barrel. Anyway, the inside of this was black and burnt, so I'm not sure what had happened. So I got a wire brushed it, sort of went over it with a bit of sandpaper, but the sandpaper wasn't really that effective, just to get rid of some of the mess, just to clean it up and make it easy to work. Brush that out, and then every joint on the inside, I got some PVA glue and squeezed that in every joint. So that's on this front face to hold it together, and along every joint round the outside. After I'd done that, pushed it in with my fingers, made sure that it's going to be held. I don't want anything falling apart, and it worked, so I'd recommend doing it because, well, why not? Next, you're going to want to make the baffle. The baffle's the bit that holds the cone in place. I suppose I could have just screwed it straight to the front edge. No, I think it was the easy way I did it. So you build a baffle. I used some pallet timber, which you get a pack for about £16 off eBay. I'll put a link to where I bought it from, but eBay listings change all the time. Anyway, space it out however you need. So you need the speaker cone. Arrange it in a square. Arrange the speaker cone so you want it to overlap the edge a fair amount. Pre-drill everything because this stuff splits quite a lot. So you're going to have 4 pieces of timber, and there's going to be some sort of gaps, as it were. So use offcuts of pallet to fill those gaps. Again, glue and screw, and try not to put screws in any stupid places, mainly the corners, because you're going to cut those off in a minute, but you don't want screws somewhere where you're going to put a speaker cone fixing. One thing I would recommend doing with this, use a tape measure to measure corner to corner. Make sure that's the same measurement, then you know it's square. You can use a square to do that, but I did both because, you know. That baffle needs to fit inside the inside of your cab. So those corners might be too big, mine were, so I had to cut the corners off, so I just did that with a saw, and then I used a Shinto rasp to round it round, and I had to sort of take it in and out a few times and taper the edges, because I made it fit quite tightly. I don't suppose it matters, but I did. Shinto rasp, one of the best tools. Use it for every single project, guitar maker, everything. Get one. I'll put a link in the description. They're about £30. Once the baffle's dried, get your cone and put it in the centre. Draw around the outside of it so you know where the outside of the cone is. And then also, I think I used a Sharpie for this. Go round every fixing so you know where those fixings are going to go. One thing I'm going to say that I forgot to mention, I don't think I've got any video of it, is I painted the front face of the baffle, so this bit and the inside bit, I painted that with black paint so that in case you could see through this grill cloth, which you sort of can't, it's all black. But I don't think I've got that on camera. Anyway, put your cone on there, and then about 30mm inside that, so like 1.25 inches on the inside, mark loads of lines and draw another circle, because that's probably where you're going to need to cut out, because you don't want to cut out where those fixings are going. I cut that with a jigsaw, and then I used a round rasp and round files to just smooth the edge. I just figured it'd be nicer if it was a bit smooth. In fact, I sanded all of it up, because I was like, even though you're never going to see it or touch it, I want it to not have bits of wood flaking off and just be crap, or catch the grill cloth on it. So you want this baffle thing, sand it up. I use the Shinto rasp around the edges as well. Make sure it's nice and smooth, and then paint it black. You're going to need to figure out where the centre of the front face of the barrel is. Now, that's easier said than done. I mean, I don't think you'll be far off, but just take a load of measurements, sort of the biggest measurement from the edge, and try and work it out, and then drill a hole, like I don't know, let's say a 5mm hole right in the centre. Or put a little pin in it with a bit of string and work out if that is the centre. I didn't do that, I just sort of guessed. I mean, it looks alright, doesn't it? So drill a hole there. You're going to want to make a jig for cutting circles, which is just a bit of timber where you screw your router to one end and have a hole in the other end for a bolt to go through. I've got a separate video, I'll put a link in the description. It takes about 10 seconds, well 5 minutes with an offcut of wood. And then I use a bolt to hold the centre in place and washers between every bit of timber and a bolt on the underside. And what I did before I cut this circle out, I made the jig so I could adjust the distance. I put these concentric rings. So I did this outer ring with a V bit. I'll put a link in the description to these as well. Just a V shape. You could do it with one of those curve shaped router bits. And just went through, cut this about 5mm deep because I thought it'd look cool. And before I did this, what is sort of now the inner ring, I did a cutout for this centre ring, but not all the way through, just sort of, I don't know, 5-10mm deep so I could see where it would be. And then I measured, because I was sort of guessing this, I measured about 20mm away from that for this ring. Because then I could carve this in by hand. I did it freehand. I drew it on and sort of did it. I sort of rushed it, to be honest, but I was like, I don't mind. It's not the main feature of the barrel. And used the same bit for that. Just freehanded, engraving stuff in. Just make sure you've got a bit of a centre line. You know, work from the centre letter if you're going to do this and go each way, which is what I did, even though the spacing is all over the place. But you just don't look at it too closely. Job done. When it comes to cutting out the centre bit, just be careful. You can probably work out how deep it is by putting a drill bit or a bolt through and sort of marking it, and go through sort of 5mm at a time or whatever you want to do. And when it comes to the last bit, be super careful. In fact, I cut sort of 3/4 of the way. I went through most of the way, so there's about 3mm of material left, and then cut all the way through about 3/4 of the way round carefully, because otherwise the weight of it's going to push it through and snap. It's oak, so it should hold in place. But when you got to the last bit, I used a hand saw to finish it, because otherwise I didn't want this centre bit's going to come loose with the jig and router on it, and then I might take a chunk out the outside. I didn't want that, obviously. So just go super carefully. You could probably screw a bit of timber to the inside in hindsight. Yeah, you should probably do that. Use some curved files and rasps, again links in the description, just to round this edge. You don't want a completely square edge, you want it to be nice. Well, it just looks better. Like I said, I did the lettering freehand with a V-shaped bit. I probably should have used a curved bit in hindsight, but I'm making another one of these for a friend, so I'll do that on his. Link in the description. I used a blowtorch to sort of darken all these lines, because it brings out the grain. So I used a blowtorch to go around all of these grooves. Actually, this inside bit, although you can't tell as much, and all the lettering, just used a blowtorch to darken it up. And then I used Crimson Guitar's finishing oil, which I think is their penetrating oil. I can't remember which. The name's changed at some point, and I don't know if it's a really old one or a new one because I've bought loads of it over the years. Use it for guitars, works perfectly for this. I mean, I think it looks awesome. Next, get your baffle, and what you're going to have to do is, well, you've already marked where the fixing holes need to be for your cone to attach. So I used M5 bolts and M5, they're called T-nuts. They're like nuts with teeth that you hammer in. So I'll link to the description. Get a set of those, get some bolts. I bought 60mm bolts, far too long, I had to cut them down with an angle grinder. So put the nut on first, angle grind it, then unscrew the nut and it fixes the thread. I used 8, you probably only need 4 or even 6, but I used 8. Anyway, drill like a 6mm hole through, or 7mm hole, I don't know how thick the T-nut thing is, and then fix those T-nuts, hammer them into it from this face, and then when you screw the bolts in to fix the speaker to it from the back, it will pull the T-nuts towards it. If you do the T-nuts from the back, they pull out, so don't do that. But put those in first. I didn't film this. I put the grill cloth on first, then realised, then had to put them, sort of tuck them behind the grill cloth and hammer it. But luckily this hides it. It didn't get too damaged actually, but don't do it that way around. Before you fit the cone, you could probably fit the cone before this, but I think it's better to do it afterwards. Get the grill cloth. I found a really nice grill cloth. I'll put a link in the description. I've used it on this, and it's this. It's nice, it's thick. I've used some terrible grill cloth before. This stuff looks great, and I think they do it in different colours. Should have used a different colour. No, I wanted it black, who cares. Anyway, fit that around, so stretch it round your baffle, use a staple gun, staple the two opposite edges and then do the other sides, and then pull the corners round, staple the hell out of that. Put your speaker cone on it, put the bolts through, make sure they're not too long, otherwise they're going to poke through the cloth, so cut them to length. M5 bolts. I did use rubber washers, but most of them split off. I'll put a link to those as well, but they did not work. Maybe I should have used thicker ones. I might redo that bit actually. I don't know if it needs rubber washers. It feels like it should have rubber washers. Use rubber washers, but thicker ones than I'm going to link. Once that's all fitted together, I put the whole baffle with the cone on it inside the barrel. It only fitted actually one way, so I did have a locating mark on the bottom edge, like basically a Sharpie line and an arrow, and a line on the outside of the barrel, so I knew where it would align. If you cut it smaller than that, you won't have that problem. And then when I put it in, I was like, how am I going to fix it to the thing? So I didn't want to drill through the speaker cloth, because a spinning screw can absolutely ruin it. So I just got some angle brackets, which doesn't look the best, but it works. So I just put an angle bracket, a sort of fairly big-ish angle bracket, like 2" by 2" thing on every corner, screwed it to the baffle, pushed down and screwed it to the side. So it works. With some more pallet timber, so it's probably worth buying a whole pack. Work out where sort of up is going to be. That's the worst description ever. And put a bit of pallet timber on the back edge of the guitar, on the guitar of the cab. Draw around that, cut it with a jigsaw, and then use that Shinto rasp to chamfer it with the edge of the barrel. So that's going to be sort of, it's not closed back, it's half closed, because you're going to need to fit the jack plate somewhere. So you're going to have to shape it and probably do it a few times and draw another line, once it starts getting close to it. But I used quite a thick bit of pallet timber, like 5" 125mm, and just drew lines a couple of times, and then used the Shinto rasp to sort of feather it in place. I used brackets to hold it in place and a couple of screws to do the outer edges to keep it nice and square. Job done. Did that top and bottom so it's symmetrical. Obviously I got the blowtorch out, blowtorched it, and then used Crimson Guitar's oil, so it looks a bit more like, it doesn't look exactly like oak, but it doesn't look out of place. These legs, these are brilliant. I got these from Amazon, linked in the description. They're about 15 quid for a pack of 8, and they come with this brass fitting which fits inside whatever you're fitting it to. Super sturdy, very good, even out at this angle, which is like at a 45-degree angle. So I put a link to those. What I did is, in the video, I drilled through sort of between the rings to fit these legs with like a 12mm drill bit. After doing that, it was too wobbly, so what I would recommend doing is drilling it further forwards, like within the ring, so it doesn't stick past the front edge, but like a centimetre or half an inch back from the front and back edge to make it sturdier. So I ended up drilling through the rings and having to actually remove one of the bolts because it was in the way. 12mm hole, fit these brass plates you have to drill through the ring again for the fitting screws. Unless you use self-tap, it's not going to go through that. You'd have to drill through. And then fitted 3 screws to hold these brass plates in place. These legs have a bolt in them, so tighten those, screw it in nice and tight. And then I put the barrel flat on its back or front, and then used a right angle thing. What's it called? Used a square, that's it, to make sure, well, I drew some lines on it so they were square, so I knew the barrel would sit upright, and then used the handsaw to cut it in line with those lines. So these are all flat. I've actually got some brass cups screwed to the top of this, so this can't slide off and kill my kids. But these legs are brilliant. Again, I sanded them a bit, got the blowtorch out, and then oiled them. It just looks a bit more... Oh, I think it looks great. You can tell it's a different wood. I don't know what hardwood this is, but they're like... I think it was £12 for a set of 8. And they're sturdy, so get them. Next, you're going to need to connect the jack socket, so get some speaker cable connectors. I'll put links in the description. I used some Marshall ones, and they only need to be about a foot long because it goes from the jack socket to the speaker. Just make sure the tip is hot or positive, and the ring, you can see if you look at the jack where the tip touches and work out which is which. Otherwise it's going to be out of phase, which I don't suppose matters, it's only a 1x12. Anyway, run that, use a normal jack plug, and the jack plates I got from eBay, so I wanted round ones. I wanted this amp head to sit on top of the cab, and obviously this slopes in like 2 directions, so I got a length of 50mm by 50mm oak, so 2" by 2" oak, that was 400mm long. I don't know what that is, 16 inches. Cut it in half, so I was left with 2 200mm lengths, which is sort of 8" lengths. I didn't film this. It was a lot of faffing. You've got to sit it on top of the barrel, try and use a level to work out what's level, make sure this is sat level, and then you've got to cut it with the curve of the barrel, but it curves 2 ways. So I used a handsaw and that Shinto rasp again to go. It took ages. You've got to shape it to 2 curves, and then I screwed it to the top of the barrel. Also used some Forstner bits, 35mm. I don't know what size you'll need depending on the feet of your amp, so that the feet sit inside them, because you don't want this to slide off and smash into the floor. So I'll put a link to the Forstner bits as well. That was a lot of work for 2 bits of batten, but it stops your amp falling off your cab. Obviously I wanted these to blend in, so again got the blowtorch out. I used some Crimson Guitars brown stunning stains to darken them. I don't know why I did that, it wasn't that necessary. And again, used the finishing oil. It doesn't look out of place, so who cares. I didn't want this to look weird, like a thing was sat on top, but it's going to look a little bit odd because it's not completely round, but I don't think that's too intrusive. And then it's done. I've got a 12" Celestion Creamback in there. Sits on top of this amp cab. I've put some brass feet screwed to this amp cab so it can't fall off or slide off. About £300 worth of stuff. I'll put a list up of all the bits of how much it actually cost, but I imagine about £300 it would cost. Looks awesome, and I don't really like the sound of a 1x12, but it sounds awesome for a 1. It looks cool, and it sounds as good as a 1x12 can sound. And here's my email address, because I'm making another one of these, so if you would like it, get in contact and we'll see what we can do.
The elephant in the room, though, is that speaker sounds really good. I am
good,
going
it's my
through...
2x12.
Yeah.
It's not the new one.
Can I hear the new one?
It's a disappointment, isn't it?
It's like the perfect speaker for recording.
You've got to know the low end's already gone, isn't it?
For that frequency that you need to thicken something up. This is a bit like the speaker equivalent of a tube screamer.
Oh, I know what you mean.
That's what it is.
All mid.
But can you run both of these?
No. But I probably could think of a way.
But what's the ohms? Is that 16?
They're both 8.
So why can't you run them both from that? There's 2 8 ohm outputs on that head.
Kidding me, are they?
Of course there are. There'll be 1 16 and 2 8 ohm outputs.
And I can use both at the same time.
We're about to find out.
I think this is going to be the best sound you've created in this studio.
I think you're right, because I was thinking I needed some kind of splitter, not my penis.
By the way, for anyone watching this, if you still are, congratulations. He's 100% like this all the time. This isn't just for video. This is just how Mark can
I
confirm
turn it down
is.
for videos. How's that?
just.
Oh yeah, watch out for that.
Oh, that really hurt.
Do you want me to help?
No, it's okay.
Do you want me to tickle your willy? Woo! Yeah. All right.
That sounds awesome. It's good.
You trying to get all my revenue from what might be my best video ever? Obviously.
Because this is completely unique. It's like it's got a low shelf on it,
It is. The low's gone, and on the floor. I think it's because it's on legs. Because even on the floor, you don't get the low end.
but together
Yeah, that's nice.
sounds
that
great.
sounded meaty.
It sounds really good.